The Orioles have made their final starting pitching move of the offseason. While they never got the true number one ace, they got who I believe was the best free agent remaining at this point, Chris Bassitt, joining the Orioles on a one-year deal. We'll break it down from every angle coming up on this live episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, February 11th, 2026, and welcome back into this live edition of the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, Connor Newcomb. Thank you so much if you're joining us live here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. And thank you as well if you're joining afterwards wherever you listen to podcasts also. But we've got some news to talk about. The Orioles have added to their rotation in what seems it will be the final starting and pitching edition for this Orioles offseason. And it is the veteran right-hander, Chris Bassitt. The Orioles have signed to a one-year, $18.5 million deal. We'll talk about who Bassitt is, how he fits into this Orioles rotation, how this could go great, how this could maybe go poorly, and what this means for the Orioles roster and the rest of their offseason. But let's begin with kind of the scouting report on what we should expect from Chris Bassitt at this point in his career. Bassitt is 36, but he will be 37 in just a couple of weeks. Turns 37 on February 22nd, and that will be the age he pitches at for the Orioles this year. Now, this deal, which was, I guess, mainstream-wise, first reported by Jeff Passan of ESPN, I got to give some credit where credit is due here. About 3 hours before this deal was actually reported by Jeff Passan, I had a comment here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, not on today or yesterday's original episode, but on a YouTube short I did about the Framber Valdez signing with the Tigers last week. And this comment, which I'll show up here on the screen, which is from YouTube user Bill Simpson 3437, said, signed Chris Bassitt to one-year deal just now. It was another 2+ hours until Jeff Passan of ESPN reported this deal. So the scoops master himself, apparently, Bill Simpson, was on this deal from the jump. So if Bill's out there watching or listening, shout out to you on that when you had the scoop. And hopefully Passan will give you the due credit for that one. But let's talk about Chris Bassitt and kind of who he is at this point. Big league career, 11 seasons, began in 2014 when he debuted with the White Sox, the team that drafted him. He was then traded to the A's in that Marcus Semien deal. Pitched in Oakland for a while through 2021, was traded to the Mets for one season, and then signed with the Blue Jays on a 3-year deal. And it's been a good career. 218 big league starts, over 1,200 innings. He's got a career 3.64 ERA. That is nothing to turn your nose up at. That is a great career so far, and I think he's got a couple of good years left in him. Now, last time the Bassitt was a free agent, it was before the 2023 season, and he signed a 3-year, $63 million contract with the Toronto Blue Jays. And if you were a listener or a viewer of this podcast, at this point 3 years ago, you know that Chris Bassitt was basically like my number one starting pitching free agent target for the Orioles that offseason. I thought he was awesome in that 1 year for the Mets in 2022. He was an innings eater. He had a ton of pitches. He was a veteran presence. I thought he would have been a perfect addition to this rotation. Now, the Orioles went out and instead got Cole Irvin and Kyle Gibson that offseason, and they probably still could have used, obviously, Chris Bassitt, although it was an amazing 2023 season for the O's. It was a great signing by Toronto, and even when Toronto was struggling in 2024, I thought maybe they'll trade Bassitt. The O's should go after him then as well with a 1.5 years on his contract. Like, he was so good in those 3 years that he pitched for Toronto in his mid to late 30s. And it was one of the better contracts in baseball. He made at least 31 starts through at least 170 innings, and with ERAs that kind of sat in the high threes in those 3 seasons. Like, in that last 3-year stretch, in that contract with the Blue Jays, Bassitt threw 541 and a third innings combined. That was the ninth most of any pitcher in Major League Baseball in that stretch. He made 95 starts, fifth most in baseball, with a 3.89 ERA and a 4.13 FIP. It was, pretty average strikeout and walk numbers, about a 22% K rate, about a 7% walk rate, which the walk rate a little bit better, kind of a lower K rate, but you will take that. I mean, this guy averaged 31 starts, 180 innings, and a 3.89 ERA over a 3-year stretch. That's really, really dependable. And that's something the Orioles could have used over those 3 years. And it's certainly something they can use in 2026. Now, his final year with the Blue Jays in 2025, he made 31 starts. He threw 170 and a third innings with a 3.96 ERA. And actually his 4.01 FIP, which is fielding independent pitching, which looks a little closer at the things you can control as a pitcher, right? Strikeouts and walks and home runs. 401 FIP is the best he's had in his 3 years with Toronto. So you could make somewhat of an argument that he's coming off his best year with the Blue Jays. Now, I would argue 2023, that first year of the deal, was his best year because he threw 200 innings and finished 10th in AL Cy Young voting, but he was still pretty dependable for the Blue Jays in 2025. He upped his strikeout rate and dropped his walk rate from 2024. You love to see that. And a 96 overall stuff plus, not really bad at all for a 36-year-old starting pitcher. Like, he's still got some stuff in that right arm. And Bassitt probably thought he was going to be a starter for the Blue Jays as they got to the postseason. Of course, eventually made a run all the way to Game 7 of the World Series. He finished last season, really, really strong. He had kind of a great April. He really struggled in May and June. He was okay in July. But then Bassitt, a 3.67 ERA in August and a 2.66 ERA in September. And people were looking around like, as long as he's healthy, maybe he should be in our playoff rotation. But that was at the same time that the Blue Jays called up and discovered Trey Savage, their rookie pitcher, and he kind of took Bassitt's spot. So despite Bassitt ending the season really strong, having a 3.69 ERA in the second half, he went into the bullpen for the postseason. And that really did work out. He made 7 appearances out of the pen for the Blue Jays. At the beginning of the postseason, he was being used as more of the long man, the mop-up guy, but he started being used in bigger and bigger roles. Eventually, he threw 8 2/3 innings during that World Series run out of the pen, had basically not been a reliever in a long, long time, and allowed just 3 hits, 1 run with 10 strikeouts to only 2 walks. Like, you could make an argument he might have been the Blue Jays' best reliever in their postseason run for a guy who had been only a starter in his 3 years in Toronto until that postseason. Like, he had not really worked out of the bullpen in the major leagues probably since a small stretch in Oakland in 2015. And he just does that and is great in that role. And that gives the Orioles potentially a little bit more flexibility in how they're going to use Bassitt this season. Game 7 of the World Series, no higher leverage. Blue Jays leading 3-1 in the 6th inning, and they put Chris Bassitt in. 2-run game in Game 7 of the World Series. That's a high leverage spot. Now, he did give up a run, but he kept the lead 3-2 going into the 7th. That guy started the postseason as the mop-up guy, and he was pitching some of the highest leverage outs in Blue Jays history by the end of the playoff run. Now, in terms of his career, he's had some ups, right? He was an all-star in 2021 with Oakland. He finished 8th in Cy Young with Oakland the year before that in the COVID 2020 season. He's had a couple of 10th place finishes in the award as well. And, 2024 with the Blue Jays, the second year of the 3-year contract, he had a 4.16 ERA in 31 starts, and that's more of a back-end innings eater guy. That was the highest ERA of any season in his career when he made at least 6 starts in the big league. So any season where he was some sort of part of the big league team, he had never had an ERA over 4 until 2 years ago. This is a guy, not only has he been good, he's been consistent, and he's been pretty healthy. This is someone who's never really had a bad season. He had Tommy John in 2016 with Oakland, really didn't return in the big leagues until 2018. But other than that, there was a little bit of a lower body injury at some point, but kind of other than that, the only injury was when he took a line drive up the face late in 2021 in his final season with the A's, only missed a month and came back later in September. And that's like a freak thing. He was a pretty much a clean bill of health, even into his mid-30s in his 3 years with Toronto. And that's the other good thing. You can't really predict health moving forward, especially when a pitcher is going to be 37 years old. But all in all, he was, I wouldn't say completely healthy, because there was just a little bit at the end of the season last year. It contributed. I think it was more that Trey Savage was good, but at least contributed to the fact that he was not in the playoff rotation for the Blue Jays. There was a little bit of back stuff at the end of last year. He went on the injured list on September 20th with lower back inflammation, and he ended up missing the rest of the regular season, but he was healthy enough to be put on the playoff roster in early October and pitched out of the bullpen. So it didn't really seem to be a big factor. And he obviously looked very, very healthy in that playoff run. So not something I'm super concerned about for Bassitt moving forward. Now, in terms of the pitch mix, like, this is what makes Chris Bassitt who he is. Even as he's entering his age 37 season, if you know Chris Bassitt, you know him for how many pitches he throws. That's right. 8 different pitches. Let me say it again. 8 different pitches. Like, only Seth Lugo and the recently retired, or it seems like retired, Yu Darvish are in the same vicinity of Chris Bassitt in terms of how many pitches they are throwing. Here is the offerings for Bassitt. 92 mile per hour sinker. He throws it about 42% of the time. That is by far his main offering. Then you've got about an 89 mile per hour cutter, 17% usage. Curveball at 71. It's a big loopy curveball. You can kind of drop in for a strike whenever he wants. That's 16% usage. This is last year. 92 mile per hour four-seam fastball. That's 9% usage. 73 mile per hour sweeper, only 6% usage, but gets a ton of swing and miss at a 51% whiff rate on that pitch last year. 84 mile per hour splitter. He throws about 5% of the time. 84 mile per hour slider, kind of a shorter, harder version of the sweeper, throws it 3% of the time. And 85 mile per hour changeup. He throws a splitter and a changeup, a slider and a sweeper. That changeup he throws about 3% of the time as well. So you never really quite know what's coming at you. You know you're going to mostly get a sinker. He throws it over 50% of the time to righties, over a third of the time against lefties. Lefties who use more cutters and curveballs and four-seamers. Righties, he'll go more to the cutter and the sweeper and the slider, and you'll see him break out the splitter and the changeup against lefties. Really doesn't throw it against righties. But even though he has some tendencies right versus left, when you throw 8 different pitches and you feel comfortable to throw them all right, I mean, the least used pitch was the changeup, and he still threw that 76 times last year. So he's able to go to it from time to time. If you're a hitter, you just don't know what's coming. And even though the stuff is, falling off a little bit, right? It's not dominant stuff. It's gone down a bit. The velo we'll get to as well. It's just hard to know what's coming from Bassitt. And that's what I want to talk about next, right? Because there's no guarantee this goes completely well. This is a 37-year-old starting pitcher. The Orioles signed a couple of older starting pitchers last offseason, and neither of those signings went well. So I can understand if you're a little scarred by this being the final starting pitching addition. So let's talk about how it would go wrong and how Chris Bassitt can fight against that. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked on Orioles podcast brought to you by Indeed, because hiring isn't just about finding someone willing to take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help your business move forward. And if you want candidates who match what you're looking for, Indeed sponsored jobs is the move. Because instead of hoping the right person stumbles across your post, Indeed helps you match with quality candidates by boosting your job listing to the people who fit your specific criteria, skills, certifications, location. Orioles went out there at this point in the offseason, said, we want somebody who can eat some innings for us, give us a veteran presence. Well, if they used Indeed, they probably would have found someone like Chris Bassitt, and that's who they signed. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Live show here on the Locked on Orioles YouTube channel. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in so far. The Orioles signing Chris Bassitt, the veteran right-handed starter, to a one-year, $18.5 million deal. If you're here, I see your messages in the chat. If you've got some questions I'll keep talking about kind of what this means for the O's, but might have a little time to answer some questions in the chat at the end of the show. So if you're watching here live on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, make sure to throw those in there as well. See, the chat is fairly lively here as people having some discussions about what this signing means for the Orioles. And I want to talk about, first of all, like, I'm going to throw it up on the screen here. This is not now totally updated because I didn't update it with Bassitt, but this is my starting pitching spreadsheet I've been working off of this offseason. And as you can see, like, I had Chris Bassitt number 2 on my list of free agent mid-rotation starters. Now, I had the top guys being Cease, Imai, Suarez, Valdez, King in order. Obviously, the O's missed on all those guys. I had Merrill Kelly number 1 mid-rotation. He went back to the D-backs. But my number 2 was Chris Bassitt. And you could see, Gallen and Giolito and Littell are still out there on that list. But what may surprise you is that I had Chris Bassitt ranked ahead of Zach Gallen. I had Gallen number 3 and Bassitt number 2 on my mid-rotation starters. So to me, do I think the Orioles should have signed a better starter this offseason? Absolutely. I know that they were most interested in Ranger Suarez, made a big push for him. He signed in Boston instead. There was interest in Cease and Valdez and the other guys when they signed elsewhere. But at this point, with what was left today, I believe the Orioles signed the best starting pitcher that was left on the market. At least that's something. And now they end up adding 3 starters in Shane Baz, Zach Eflin, and Chris Bassitt this offseason. That's going to do it for the starting pitchers, unless they would make a trade where they trade away one of their current starters. Not really any room to put anyone else in that rotation. And I'm a big Chris Bassitt guy. Again, if you've been watching or listening to the show, I wanted him so badly in free agency 3 years ago. Now, he's a bit of a different pitcher. He's 3 years older. He's about to be 37. But the way he pitched the last 3 years, if he can just duplicate that, at least somewhat, that's huge for what the Orioles would want at the back end of their rotation. But there's no guarantee it goes that well, right? When you think about the ways this could go poorly, you start with his age. He is going to be 37 years old. And as good as he has been, and as consistent as he has been, as dependable as he's been, as healthy as he's been, really that little lower back thing at the end of last season, I believe that was the only IL trip he made in his 3 seasons with the Blue Jays. That's remarkably healthy for a starter. Again, he got the Tommy John in 2016. Really hasn't been much injuries at all in the 10 years since then. That's remarkable. But that doesn't guarantee he's probably has a good health grade. That doesn't guarantee it's going to continue because he's 30. He's going to be 37. He's going to be into his late 30s. Guys' bodies can start to break down. And that could happen, right? We saw it last year. The Orioles signed a 40-year-old Charlie Morton and a 35-year-old Tomoyuki Sugano. Now, 2 different signings, right? Sugano had never pitched in the big league, so you kind of didn't know. His didn't go well, although shout out to Sugano, who did sign a 1-year deal with the Rockies. Good luck to him. And Charlie Morton, I mean, he had shown into his late 30s and even 40 that he could still be a good pitcher in his time with the Braves, and it just kind of all fell off a cliff. And he recovered enough for the Orioles to be able to trade him and get at least an intriguing relief prospect in Micah Ashman from the Tigers at last year's deadline. But then Morton fell apart with the Tigers too and was DFA'd, and it seems pretty clear his career's over, that nobody's really going to sign Charlie Morton this offseason. So you could have an inkling that because he was 41, it was going to fall off the cliff soon. And that's probably what worried me about the Orioles being interested in Justin Verlander before he signed to go back to the Tigers this week. You don't know. But if you're the Orioles, you see how consistently good he has been and how consistently healthy he has been. And you have to just bet on that he's going to continue to do that, right? If you want to talk about differences with Charlie Morton, well, first and foremost, Bassitt is 4 years younger than Morton was last year. So there's something. Actually, it's more like 5 years younger, really, is what he is than Charlie Morton. But not just that, you look at the previous 3 seasons Morton had coming into his Orioles deal. 170 to 163, 165 was his inning counts. Bassitt was 200, 170, 170. So through a ton more innings, he was healthier. And you look at the ERAs for Morton, 4.3, 3.6, 4.2. Bassitt, better, 3.6, 4.2, 3.9. He was just better and healthier and younger in those 3 years. So I understand if you're like, this could be Charlie Morton all over again. It is a possibility. This is a better package for the Orioles to bring in on a 1-year deal than Morton was at this time last year. So that's at least nice. But the age could get to him, right? And there's velo stuff too. It's not just that the overall stuff is falling off. I think that's less of an issue because the location numbers, they still look good. for Chris Bassitt. You pull up his location plus stats on FanGraphs. His 101 he had last year in Toronto was his best since 2022 with the Mets. So he's locating even better as he gets older, which is the way you stay relevant as a starting pitcher into your late 30s. But his stuff is diminishing. The 96 stuff plus he put up last year was the lowest of his career. It was 98 the previous 2 years with Toronto. It was 104 the previous 3 years with Oakland and then the Mets when they started kind of counting it on FanGraphs dating back to 2020. So yeah, stuff is diminishing a little bit, especially on the four-seam fastball. But he still has a pretty good sweeper, and the sinker still has a 101 stuff plus, which for a starter at 37 is really, really good. He locates all the pitches really well. He keeps hitters off balance. Velo-wise, he was down to 91.6 miles per hour average on the sinker, which is the lowest of his career. Now, it's not crazy concerning. It was 92.5 in 2024, so he's down almost 1 mile per hour. That would concern you. But if you just go back to 2023 when he threw 200 innings, he was 91.9. So if you look at it on a 2-year gap of 91.9 to 91.6, that's how much you would expect a pitcher going from 35 to 37 to lose in velo, half a tick basically. And he's been kind of 92 to 93 for most of his career. Even you go back to 2018, he averaged 91.8 on the sinker. That was a different Chris Bassitt, 8 years ago, who was still in his 20s. So he can be good with the velo being 91. Now, you don't want to see that drop towards 90 point something and another whole tick off. That would be a big issue. But if he can still sit 91.5 in 2026 with the 7 other pitches he throws and the good command, I think he's going to be good. But you do have to think about the age and the velo. It's slow, but it is dropping off. That is going to be a factor on what he can do for the Orioles. But that is the real question here, right? Like, how does he fit? Because Mike Elias told us on Wednesday that Zach Eflin is expected to be fully healthy and ready to go for opening day. That really gives him a solidified spot as the Orioles' number 5 starter. And all 5 of the O starters are healthy right now, as pitchers and catchers reported this week, and they began workouts today. So Bassitt becomes a 6th guy. How do you fit him in? That's what we'll talk about to finish off the show. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. The winter games are officially here. If you're anything like me, you're locking in for events that you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. I have watched a sickening amount of curling. And because of that, I'm following the winter games on FanDuel because it just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle in the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. Curling matches, do they start off a little slow? Maybe, but there is extreme drama at the end. I was quite upset to see the U.S. mixed curling team lose on the final stone in the gold medal match, but I was locked into curling. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. That's FanDuel. Play your game. So the O's have signed Chris Bassitt to a 1-year, $18.5 million deal coming off 3 really good years with Toronto. He's about to be 37. How does he fit into this Orioles rotation? Because everybody's healthy, right? The projected rotation of Kyle Bradish, Trevor Rogers, Shane Baz, Dean Kramer, Zach Eflin, they have all entered camp with pitchers and catchers reporting this week as healthy. They've all thrown already. We thought that there was an opening because even after the Orioles re-signed Zach Eflin to a 1-year, $10 million deal earlier this offseason, he had pretty major back surgery back in August. And the recovery timeline still gave him a good chance to be ready for opening day. But we figured, hey, the O's signed him not late in the offseason, but not super early. Maybe he kind of fell back into their laps. The Orioles know they need to upgrade a little bit more. Maybe they figured, hey, Eflin might not be ready for opening day. He might start the year on the injured list, but we're still trying to sign another pitcher anyway. And when Eflin's ready by May 1st, someone else will probably be hurt. He'll be helpful to us, especially if he is fully healthy again from the back issue that apparently has bothered him for like years and years until finally getting surgery last season. Now, if he's going to be ready for opening day, it changes the conversation a little bit. Because you don't have that easy opening of, at least for 2 weeks, Eflin will be on the IL, will need a 5th starter. That's where a guy like enter whoever it was. It turns out to be Chris Bassitt, fits in. Now you have 6 healthy starters, which is a good problem to have. I'm not saying this is a bad problem. This is categorized as good problem to have. If you want to start the year with a 5-man rotation, there are really 2 ways to do it. Way number 1, I would hate to do, and that is optioning Dean Kremer to AAA. He has minor league options. Now, other guys do too. I believe Bradish and even Rogers potentially have some minor league options. You know what, Connor? Why don't you just go to Roster Resource, because FanGraphs has everything you need to answer these questions. Let's see. To the Orioles rotation, no, Rogers is out of options, but Bradish, Shane Baz, and Dean Kremer have them. So theoretically, one of those 3 going to AAA. Kyle Bradish is your ace coming off Tommy John. He's not going to AAA. Shane Baz, you gave up a good amount of prospects to go and get. He pitched a full season for the Rays last year. You see him as a top of the rotation guy. Elias and Albernaz have said that this week. You're not sending Baz down to AAA. So most likely, if you option somebody, it would not be those guys. It would be Dean Kremer, who is in his final year of having minor league options. So you could theoretically send him to Norfolk. I just don't think you're going to do that, right? Like, Kremer was so helpful to you and stayed so healthy. It's not like he was amazing, but he gave you a 4.1 ERA in 171 innings last year, which you didn't really get from anyone else on this roster. He, like Chris Bassitt, has just been a little bit worse version of Bassitt, where he's still being consistent with basically a 4.1 ERA and eating innings for 3 straight years for the Orioles. Is he worse than Chris Bassitt? Yes. And I think I'd put Bassitt ahead of him. But if you're going to move someone out, I think I'd rather just go with option 2, which is just move one of these guys into the bullpen. Again, if you want to go with a 5-man rotation. Now, what's nice is you have some options to go with. I think Bradish, Rogers, Baz, maybe something changes throughout the season, but right now you're not moving any of those guys to AAA or to the bullpen. They are guys you have invested in, who have given you really, really good pitching. The options to go to the pen, if you're not going to go to AAA, which I don't think they should, are the bottom 3, are Bassitt, Kremer, and Eflin. What's nice about all 3 of them is that they all have some bullpen experience. For Chris Bassitt, he hadn't done it a lot, but we saw what he did out of the bullpen in October for the Blue Jays. That could be helpful. Zach Eflin, early in his career, when the Phillies kind of tried to use him as a starter and he didn't really work out that way, Eflin went to the bullpen for the Phillies. And Eflin, for stretches there, even when the Phillies were going to the playoffs, was really freaking good out of the bullpen for Philadelphia. He's never spent a full year as a reliever, but in 2022, he was kind of a hybrid starter reliever for Philadelphia. And when they went to the playoffs, he was used as only a reliever. He made 10 relief appearances. He kind of had a Chris Bassitt level stretch there where he made 10 relief appearances as the Phillies went to the World Series. He threw 10 2/3 innings, 12 Ks, 2 walks, 4 runs. Like, he was incredibly helpful for that Philly bullpen to get them to the Fall Classic. Now, this is a different Zach Eflin we're talking about 4 years later, while Bassitt's just, 6 months later after seeing him in the bullpen, but it's something he's done. And for Dean Kremer, if you remember, all the way back to 2022, the Orioles began the year with Kremer actually in the bullpen to begin the season. He made the opening day roster, but as a reliever, not as a starter. And when Kremer was warming up in Tampa in the first series of the year to come in for his relief appearance, he felt something, didn't come in the game, instead went on the injured list for a couple of months. And once he came back in the middle of 2022, the Orioles needed starters, so they put him back in the rotation, and he just pitched well and stayed in the rotation for the rest of 22. And Dean Kremer, when healthy, has basically been in the Orioles rotation since that moment. But they felt at least okay enough to put him in the bullpen then. And remember, Kremer pitched in relief on the final day of the 2025 regular season, and his stuff played up, and he looked really good. Now, I'm seeing some comments, too, talking about Dean Kremer's tough starts to his seasons. And that is something you at least have to consider here. Like, I don't think you want to put an onus on a guy that he's always bad early in the year. But Dean Kremer had a 7.04 ERA in March and April last season. And the calendar turned to May. He immediately had a 2.72 ERA in May and was honestly great for the rest of the year. If you take out March and April, Kremer had a fantastic season. So it's a possibility that you just say, Dean Kremer, work out your weird early season stuff in the bullpen. And then when we need you in the rotation, we'll put you in there. Because if you look at his career splits, Dean Kramer, 6.24 ERA in March and April. Every other month, his ERA is in the 3s or 4s. So there's something to that, whether it's the cold weather, him being from the West Coast or what it is, something bothers Dean in that first month where he is not very good. So that, coupled with the fact that he has some relief experience, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for him to go to the bullpen. But I think between him and Bassitt and Eflin, they all have the experience to do it. The other thing you could just do is just start the year with a 6-man rotation. And I think if you ask me right now, what would the Orioles do? I think they would at least begin the year with a 6-man rotation with all 6 of these guys for at least 2 turns through the rotation, and then they'd see where they're standing. Because Kyle Bradish, he only made 6 starts last year. You're probably going to somewhat limit his innings. Shane Baz, while he did throw a full 30-some starts last season, has had a ton of injury issues over his career. You might need someone to fill in for him. Trevor Rogers was awesome, but he was also injured at the beginning of the year, and he only pitched 100 innings and change. Didn't even hit 110 innings. Can you expect him to give you 180? Probably not. There's some fill in there. Zach Eflin, whole year last year, basically wiped out with injury, coming off major back surgery. I don't think you're expecting 180 innings-wise out of Zach Eflin. The guy I would be most expecting to pitch a full season is probably Dean Kramer and then Chris Bassitt, but that's only 2 out of the 6 guys. So having a 6th starter who has this kind of big league pedigree and has been so healthy and consistent at eating innings and being good at it is just going to raise the floor of this team, is going to fill in, you project to need 850 to 900 total innings out of starting pitchers in a single season if you're going to be good. Bassitt gives you at the very least 150, and it feels like at least 160 or 170 really good innings to fill that in. It takes some pressure off of Tyler Wells or Cade Povich or Albert Suarez or Brandon Young or even any of the rookies like Trey Gibson to have to fill in for those starts. And as much as I think Cade Povich still could have it, and as much as I think Tyler Wells has really good stretches as a starter, what we've seen over the last few years tells us that you don't want to be trusting Tyler Wells or Cade Povich to have even semi-long-term stints in your rotation if you could instead just put a consistent good pitcher like Chris Bassitt in there. And that is now what the Orioles are able to do. And that is why you make this move, because it ups the floor of your rotation. It gives you better fill-in. It keeps you, hopefully, from doing what you had to do last year, which is go to Brandon Young in April. Brandon Young went into spring training as like the Orioles' 10th starter on the depth chart, and he had to start games in April. That is how bad it got. You should be building enough depth now where you don't have to do that early in the season. You've got these top 6 guys. Wells would be built up as a starter. He's your 7th. He'll go in the bullpen. Povich is your 8th. Young is your 9th. Suarez is your 10th. You've got a top 100 prospect in Trey Gibson as your number 11 guy now entering camp. That is a good spot to be in because you're going to need at least 8 starters and sometimes closer to 10 to get through a full big league season. To have Trey Gibson and his prospect status be number 11 on that list to begin the year is great. That is a great spot to be in. And to be quite honest, somebody's going to get injured. As much as I hate to say it, one of these 5 guys, other than Bassitt, or maybe even Bassitt, is going to get injured. It is the status of starting pitching in Major League Baseball. Rarely can a team, even with 6 starters, get through a season with 6 pretty much fully healthy starters. Add to that with the fact that the guys like Bradish and Rogers I talked about that have to be limited on their innings a little bit. This is why I said, even after having Eflin and Baz and the Orioles missing on Framber Valdez and Ranger Suarez, and people were saying, is it even worth it to sign one of these lesser guys to a 1-year deal like a Bassitt or a Verlander? I kept arguing yes, because you still need to backfill these innings. When guys are on limits or guys get injured, it comes down to this. Given the choice of Tyler Wells, Cade Povich, or Chris Bassitt to make 15 starts for you this year, I'm taking Chris Bassitt every single time on that list. That is why the Orioles are better after making this move. Is it the giant needle mover that Valdez or Suarez maybe could have been? No, it's not. But you compare Bassitt to some of those guys, the stats over the last few years, They're worse, but they're not too far off. And if you really project Bassitt to do what he's done the last couple of years, you could argue he's the number 3 starter right now. I'd probably argue he's closer to number 4 below Boz, and then it's kind of Kramer versus Eflin fighting it out for 5 and 6. But he's been better than you think. I've been on the Chris Bassitt train for a while. They signed him 3 years later than I wanted them to, and maybe a little lesser version and an older version, but he's still a helpful pitcher, and he's still going to help this Orioles rotation. Again, if I had to predict it, I would say if everyone stays healthy, they begin the year with a 6-man rotation and a 7-man bullpen. It's kind of opened it up because Colin Selby is going to start the year on the injured list with shoulder inflammation. So Bassitt can kind of take his spot on the projected opening day roster. You go 2 turns through the rotation early in the year with a 6-man, and you reassess. Is someone really struggling? Does someone need a start skipped? Is the bullpen tired, or is someone injured? If everything still looks perfect, maybe you keep it up. But it's pitching in Major League Baseball early in the season. You're bound to have something happen. Then you can switch, whether someone's injured, someone's struggling, needs to go to the bullpen, AAA, whatever it may be. I think that's how they'll start it off, and then they'll kind of make their tweaks from there. Maybe one of these guys will move to the pen. Either way, you're going to need innings covered, and the Orioles are going to have them covered. I'd be shocked if they made another starting pitching move unless they, again, did a trade where they dealt away Dean Kramer, dealt from the rotation to get someone else. Was it the best it could have been? No, because they didn't get any of these top arms. But a Boz, Eflin, Bassitt is a really good offseason. This is the best Orioles offseason when you add it to Pete Alonso and Ryan Helsley and Taylor Ward. The best Orioles offseason we have seen in a long, long time. They might not even be done. They could very easily still add another relief pitcher at some point. I think it'd be helpful to do that before opening day. But I feel really good about where the O's are at right now. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for joining us on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If the O's make any other moves, we'll be live here. We got a ton of content coming up for you. Already have recorded the episode coming out tomorrow. We're going to talk about the unfortunate injury news from the Mike Elias presser on Wednesday. Jackson Holliday, broken hamate bone. He's going to miss opening day. He'll start the year on the IL, but I talk about why the timeline isn't too bad. Jordan Westburg has an oblique issue. They're thinking he'll be ready for opening day, but I'm a little concerned. I'll get to that. And even before the Bassitt signing, we got some good news in terms of pitcher health, and I'll talk about that on tomorrow's episode. If you are listening after the fact, make sure to follow, subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating and a review. Really helps out the pod as well. And you can always email me, lockedonorioles@gmail.com. We've got some great conversations over there. We're chatting ball, asking questions, always taking feedback for the show. But if you are new here, jumping into the live show is your first time, we are Locked On Orioles, 5 episodes per week, 25 to 35 minutes per episode. We've got you covered everything you can want to know from the Orioles all throughout the season, and a fun time to jump in now. And if you're really liking the show, you could join the Everydayer Club. For just $5 per month or $50 per year, you can get ad-free episodes of Locked On Orioles. You can get access to an exclusive Discord channel with me and other Orioles fans talking O's ball all the time. And you get even more perks. You just go to lockedonorioles.supercast.com, where you can check out the link down in the show notes as well. And we're going to be doing a Locked On Orioles live show. Not just live like this. I mean live in person. Checker Spot Brewing, Sunday, March 29th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be doing a live show along with Bob and Zach from the Orioles on the Verge podcast. Going to be a ton of fun. We'll do some giveaways. We'll have some audience participation. We'll watch the Orioles game against the Twins right after the show. It's free to come and hang out. So definitely, if your calendar's open for the 29th, come check out our live show at Checker Spot. That'll do it for today's live episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Back tomorrow to talk about the Jackson Holliday and Jordan Westburg injury news. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.